Belisarius Cawl has been alive for 10,000 years. He was there, or close enough, when the Imperium was young. He has spent 10 millennia keeping himself running through cybernetic resurrection after resurrection, hoarding knowledge that died with everyone else, working in secret on a project the Emperor himself supposedly commissioned before the Heresy. And the result of that project changed the galaxy. The Primaris Marines, a new generation of space marines, built bigger and better than anything since the Great Crusade. But stop and think about what building them actually required. To engineer new space marines, Cawl needed the gene templates of the Primarchs, the genetic blueprints of the Emperor's sons, and he had them. All of them, including, by simple necessity, the two that the Imperium erased from history, the Second and the 11th. You cannot work with a complete set of 20 and not notice that two of them were scrubbed from every record in existence. Cawl noticed. Cawl, who forgets nothing and discards nothing, has been sitting on the genetic truth of the lost Primarchs for 10,000 years. The question was never whether the answer survived. The question is, why the one man who has it has never said a word. So let's be precise about what this video is and what it isn't. We are not re-arguing whether the lost Primarchs existed. We are not naming them, and we are not assigning them an identity. We are asking a narrower, colder question, one the audience asked first. Under a video on this exact mystery, a viewer named Bill Hansen laid it out in a single line that got 66 other people nodding. The only person who would have a clue is Cawl, because he holds the template for all 20 Primarchs, handed down from Guilliman. That comment is the spine of everything that follows, because it is right. And the proof that it is right does not come from a fan forum.
It comes from the source material, from Codex Space Marines, from Guy Haley's novels, and from a single artifact most people have never heard of. Start with the man himself, because his character is the whole argument. Belisarius Cawl is an Archmagos Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, pronounced, if you want it right, Belisarius Cawl, and Archmagos as Archmagos. He was born on Mars in the final years of the Great Crusade, which makes him somewhere north of 10,000 standard years old. That is not a figure of speech. That is the actual figure. He has outlived every human being who was alive when the Imperium was founded. And he has done it by becoming something that is barely a human being anymore. A towering construct of brass and flesh, augmented so completely that, by the lore's own admission, almost nothing organic remains of his original body except perhaps fragments of his brain. The Codex calls him an Archmagos.
The closer you read, the more he looks like a walking archive that learned to talk. Because that is the part that matters. Cawl does not just survive, he accumulates. To preserve knowledge across 10,000 years, he absorbs the minds of other tech priests, hundreds of them, downloading their memories and expertise directly into his own consciousness through a process the Mechanicus calls cerebral downloading. His personality is a composite of hundreds of people. He is famed across the entire priesthood of Mars as the holder of a knowledge hoard no one else can match. And here is the detail that should stop you. Even after having his memories wiped on 2 separate occasions, he still came out the other side with that hoard intact. He built a backup of himself, a digital construct called the Cawl Inferior, described in the lore as containing the sum total of its creator's knowledge. This is a being engineered from the ground up to never lose information.
That is his defining trait.
Hold on to it, because it is the hinge the entire deduction turns on. Now, why does a man like that end up holding the genetic blueprints of the Emperor's sons? For that, you need the charter. And the charter goes back further than most people realize. When Cawl first met the Emperor, during the Unification Wars, before the Great Crusade had even properly begun. The emperor addressed him by name through sheer psychic prescience, and told him that it would be his responsibility to continue the emperor's work. The lore preserves the chilling shape of that instruction. He was to continue that work even if he came to believe that he had betrayed everything the emperor stood for. Sit with that line. The single being in this story who was handed a mandate by the emperor's own mouth was also told, in advance, that the mandate might one day look like treason. That is not a man who was kept in the dark. That is a man who was read in.
The second half of the charter comes after the Horus Heresy. Robute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, charges Cawl with building a new generation of transhuman warriors. A task set, the records suggest, before Guilliman himself was struck down by the demon Primarch Fulgrim at the Battle of Thessaly. This is the great work. It spans 10,000 years. It runs through the entire long night while the galaxy tears itself apart. And it emerges, finally, in the 42nd millennium with the Primaris Marines, the army that, in universe, gets the credit for dragging the Imperium back from the edge of annihilation. And to do it, Cawl needed raw material. He needed the gene stock of the Primarchs. Which brings us to the artifact, and to the single most important object in this entire investigation. Here's what the canon refuses to advertise but states outright when you go looking. The artifact is called the Primaris Portum,
and according to the lore, the Primaris Portum contains perfect copies of the genetic material harvested from all 20 of the original Primarchs, the stock used to create the Space Marine legions in the first place. Not 9, not 18, 20. Guilliman entrusted it to Cawl shortly after the second founding, in the early 31st millennium. Read that again, slowly, because this is the moment the comment section was pointing at. The Imperium spent 10,000 years erasing 2 Primarchs from every record it controlled, and the entire time, sitting in the keeping of one arch-magos, was a vault that still held their genome. The Edict of Obliteration removed the name. It did not remove the body. This is where the deduction stops being a guess and starts being arithmetic. The lore is explicit. In pursuit of an improved Space Marine, Cawl collected samples of the genomes of all 20 of the original Primarchs, including those deemed lost or traitor. Guilliman made clear that the Primaris were to be built only from the 9 loyalist lines. But the source material, the templates Cawl was working from, was the complete set. You cannot hand a geneticist a library of 20 volumes, order him to only print from 9, and expect him to somehow not notice which 2 volumes have no title on the spine. The completeness of the set is the problem. The gap inside it is shaped exactly like the lost Primarchs, and Cawl, the being who forgets nothing, is holding the volume. And consider what the completeness actually means in practice, because this is the part the comment got exactly right. To improve the Space Marine, Cawl had to understand the Space Marine, which means understanding the Primarch the gene line descends from, because every Astartes chapter is, in the end, a diluted echo of one of the Emperor's sons. The 9 loyalist chapters he was authorized to work with all trace back to 9 known Primarchs. But the Primaris Portum does not stop at 9. It holds the lines of the traitors, whose Primarchs are known, and it holds the lines of the 2nd and the 11th, whose Primarchs are not known to anyone. So when Cawl sat down to map the full landscape of Primarch genetics, the only way to truly understand what he was improving, he was not working with a partial data set. He was working with all of it. He had the complete genetic family tree of the Emperor's 20 sons in front of him, 2 branches of which the rest of the Imperium has spent 10,000 years insisting do not exist. He is not guessing at the shape of the gap. He is the one being who can see what is filling it. So the question Bill Hanson's comment forces is not whether the answer survived. It survived. The question is what Cawl did with two preserved gene lines that, officially, nobody is supposed to even know are preserved. And the lore gives us a partial answer, which is the next link in the chain.
So let's hold the line steady here, because this is exactly where careless versions of this theory overreach, and I don't want to. There is a difference between possessing the material and decoding the meaning. That Cawl physically holds the templates of all 20, including the 2nd and the 11th, is not really speculation. It is what the Sang Primus Portum is, by the book's own description. What is a deduction, and I'll flag it every time it comes up, is the leap from holding the genome to knowing the story. A gene template is data. It is not a confession. It tells you what a Primarch was built to be at the level of biology. It does not narrate why 2 of them were struck from history. So when this video says Cawl knows the truth, understand the claim precisely. He holds the one surviving copy of the source material, and he has had 10,000 years and the finest mind in the Imperium to read it. The knowing is inferred from the access and the longevity.
The access is on the page. And the access goes further than passive storage, which is the detail that turns this from a curiosity into a case. Because Cawl didn't just keep the forbidden lines in a drawer, he took them out. The lore states that Cawl extracted the genetic lines of the traitor legions and the long-lost 2nd and 11th from the Sang Primus Portum and went to Guilliman to ask permission to use them. He ran the experiment. And here is the finding that the strongest objection to this entire video is built on. So I'm going to put it on the table myself rather than wait for the comments to do it. According to Cawl's own results, those dangerous, long-thought-destroyed genetic lines displayed no sign of degradation and no incidence of unwelcome tendencies in the recipients. They read clean. Guilliman forbade their use anyway. Now, the objection. If the lost lines read clean, no corruption, no flaw, nothing unusual, then doesn't that prove there is no secret?
Doesn't a clean template mean there is nothing for Cawl to be sitting on?
This is the cohort's sharpest counter-argument, and it deserves a real answer, not a dodge. So here is the answer, and I'll mark it clearly as reasoning, not as confirmed canon. A template that reads, clean of corruption, describes the absence of corruption. It does not describe the absence of meaning. Consider the cohort's most validated reading of one of the lost Primarchs, that he was something the warp could not touch, a null, a blank, a being defined not by a presence but by an absence. For a being like that, the defining trait would not show up as a flaw on a gene map. It would show up as nothing, no anomaly, no corruption, no unwelcome tendency. The blank does not read as a stain. The blank reads as clean. So Cawl reporting nothing unusual would not disprove a blank. It would describe one. The clean result is not the end of the mystery. It is the most unsettling possible form of it.
I want to be scrupulous, because that reading is a theory, and the lore treats it as one.
There are voices in the fan base who will tell you the null Primarch idea is unlikely on its face. Primarchs are saturated with warp essence, and the Emperor, for all his work, never reliably produced a true blank. That is a fair objection, and I am not going to pretend it away. We are not naming the lost Primarchs, and we are not declaring what they were. The point of the clean template argument is narrower, and it survives even if you reject the null reading entirely. A gene template that comes back normal cannot be used as proof that there was nothing defined. It is exactly the result you would expect whether the secret is enormous or whether the secret is nothing at all. Which means the test that was supposed to settle the question settles nothing. And the only being who has actually read the printout has not told us which it is.
Here is where it gets stranger, and where the silence starts to feel deliberate rather than accidental. Because Belisarius Cawl is not a quiet man. He is, by every account, the opposite of discreet. The Black Library novels paint him as monumentally arrogant. One reviewer of Guy Haley's Belisarius Cawl, The Great Work, called him an egotistical figure who is essentially the only thing holding the story together, a being convinced of his own indispensability. He documents his achievements. He justifies his heresies at length. He has broken nearly every law the cult Mechanicus has, trafficking with Xenos, wielding forbidden technology, building machines that may qualify as artificial intelligences, and his response to being called a heretic is not to hide. It is to argue that he was right. Games Workshop's own writers framed him in a public article with a two-word question: hero or heretic? This is a being who broadcasts, who defends himself in the open,
who treats his own controversial work as a thing to be recorded and explained, not buried. And yet, on the single most explosive piece of genetic knowledge in the entire Imperium, the truth of the two erased Primarchs, sitting in his own vault, decoded or decodable by his own hand, this loudest, proudest, most self-justifying being in 10,000 years of history has said precisely nothing. He will defend trafficking with Xenos. He will defend building an outlawed intelligence. He will stand in front of a Primarch and argue that he should be allowed to resurrect the genetics of the traitor legions. But the second and the 11th? On that, the man who documents everything documents nothing. And for a being this meticulous, that is not an oversight. You do not accidentally fail to mention the one secret in your vault that could rewrite the foundation of the Imperium. Silence, from a man who is incapable of being quiet about anything else, is not the absence of an answer. It is a choice, and choices have reasons. So, what are the reasons? There are two, and the honest position, the only honest position, is that the lore does not tell us which one is true, so we are going to lay out both and let you weigh them. Do not let anyone, including this channel, tell you the case is closed on this. It is not. But the two explanations are not equal in flavor, and the difference between them is the difference between Cawl as a loyal servant and Cawl as a man who made a private judgment about what the galaxy can survive knowing. The first explanation is that the silence was ordered. Remember the charter. The Emperor read Cawl in personally during the Unification Wars, with a mandate wrapped in a warning that he might one day look like a traitor for keeping it. Remember that Guilliman handed him the Sang Primus Portum, the vault of all 20 lines, knowing exactly what was in it, including the two that the Imperium had erased. If the men who trusted Cawl with the genome also bound him to silence about the genome, then everything we are looking at is simply obedience. The Edict of Obliteration was the most successful act of erasure in Imperial history, precisely because the truth was contained to a tiny circle. The lore says it plainly, that the transgressions of the 2nd and 11th are known only to the surviving Primarchs and the Emperor himself. Notice that Cawl is not on that list as written, but notice also that he holds the one thing that could put him on it. If his silence is ordered, then he is doing exactly what he was told by the only two authorities in the galaxy whose orders he might actually keep. And there is a quiet logic to this reading that is easy to miss. The whole point of an Edict of Obliteration is that it only works if the circle stays small. The moment one more voice starts speaking the names, the erasure begins to fail. So if the Emperor and Guilliman went to the trouble of containing this truth to the Primarchs alone, the last thing they would want is for the genome of the 2nd and the 11th
to fall into the hands of a famously loud archmagos with no instinct for keeping his mouth shut, unless that archmagos came pre-bound. Unless the same charter that handed Cawl the work also handed him the silence as a condition of it. The Emperor's warning, "Keep going even when it looks like betrayal," reads very differently once you put the lost Primarchs into it. It stops being a vague philosophical caution. It starts sounding like a specific instruction about a specific secret. Continue the work, keep what you find, and never, under any circumstances, tell. But there is a problem with that reading, and it is the same problem that haunts everything about Cawl. He does not keep other people's secrets well. He kept almost nothing else Guilliman asked of him.
The second explanation is darker, and it fits his character better. It is that no one ordered Cawl to stay silent, that Cawl examined the templates himself, understood something in them, and decided, on his own authority, that the galaxy could not safely be told. This is a being who has never accepted anyone's restrictions as final. He went around the Mechanicus. He went around its laws. He went, repeatedly, around Guilliman. So why, on this one subject, would he obey? The answer that fits is that he didn't obey an order. He reached a conclusion. He read what was in the Second and the 11th, weighed it the way he weighs everything, coldly, completely, with 10,000 years of context no one else possesses, and judged that releasing it would do more harm than holding it. For a man who trusts no judgment above his own, the most in-character reason to keep a secret is not because he was told to. It is because he decided to.
Hold both of those, because the next question cuts underneath them both.
Forget for a moment who told Cawl to be quiet. Ask instead what could be in those templates that would make even Cawl, even the loudest heretic in the Imperium, choose to keep his mouth shut. And this is where you have to think about what his entire life's work is built on. The Primaris project is not just an army. It is a statement of faith. It says that the Emperor's gene legacy is sound, that the blueprint of his sons is a thing to be trusted, improved, and mass-produced. Cawl spent 10,000 years selling that statement to a dying Imperium. Now imagine the templates of the Second and the 11th say something that contradicts it. Imagine they show that the Emperor built sons and then erased them, not because they failed, but because they succeeded at something he could not allow.
Imagine the genome of a lost Primarch reveals that the Emperor was capable of building a weapon so dangerous he had to unmake it and pretend it never existed. If that is what the templates say, then Cawl's silence is not just protecting a secret, it is protecting his life's work. Because the entire Primaris program rests on the unspoken promise that the Emperor's design can be trusted. Reveal that the Emperor designed 2 of his sons to be erased, that the gene legacy contains a deliberate void, a thing too terrible to acknowledge, and you have not just told a dark story. You have put a crack in the foundation of the army Cawl built to save the Imperium. A galaxy that doubts the gene legacy is a galaxy that doubts the Primaris. And Cawl, who has spent 10,000 years on this single great work, has every reason in the world to make sure that crack never opens. His silence on this reading is not loyalty to the Emperor. It is loyalty to the project. He is not hiding the truth to protect the Imperium's faith. He is hiding it to protect his own. And remember who he is selling that project to. The Primaris are not deployed into a calm, rational Imperium that weighs evidence. They are deployed into a galaxy where the Emperor is a literal god, where the gene seed of the Astartes is treated as a holy sacrament, where the smallest deviation from the sacred template is grounds for a chapter to be declared cursed and erased in turn. In that environment, the Emperor built 2 sons and then unmade them,
is not a footnote. It is a heresy with teeth.
It would hand every enemy of the Primaris project, and Cawl has many, inside the Mechanicus and out, the one weapon they have been missing. Proof that the gene legacy is not sacred but provisional, that the Emperor himself edited his own design and erased the failures, which means the design can fail, which means the Primaris standing in front of you might be the next thing the Imperium decides was a mistake. Cawl spent 10,000 years building an army the Imperium would accept as the Emperor's true heirs. He is not going to hand the Imperium a reason to doubt them. Whatever is in those two templates, the safest place for it, for the project, for the army, for Cawl's entire reason to exist, is exactly where it has been the whole time. Sealed, silent, read by one being and explained to none. And we have a model for exactly this kind of forbidden gene work, sitting right there in his own resume, which is the part that makes the whole thing land. His name is Alpha Primus.
The lore tells us Cawl tried, at least once, to recreate the very process the Emperor used to make the Primarchs, to build a Primarch of his own. It failed, because even Cawl lacked the full knowledge, and what he got instead became the prototype for the Primaris template. But look at what Alpha Primus is. A being with a chimeric gene seed assembled from multiple legions, possibly including Magnus the Red's, blended with Cawl's own genetics. A psyker of unmatched power, in constant agony, the only one of his kind, who considers himself loyal not to the Emperor but to Cawl. Here is a man who has already taken the Primarch creation process apart and tried to rebuild it. Here is a man who has already had the lost and forbidden lines out of the vault and under his instruments. The idea that he handled the genome of the Second and the 11th, understood it, and quietly filed the understanding away is not a stretch for this character.
It is consistent with literally everything else he has done. So let's also be honest about what the canon has never shown us, because this video does not work if I hide the seams. Games Workshop has never published a scene of Belisarius Cawl addressing the lost Primarchs. There is no chapter where Cawl sits down and explains the Second and the 11th. The closest the lore ever comes to a glimpse of a lost Primarch is in Aaron Dembski-Bowden's The First Heretic, where a group of word-bearers, shown a vision by a demon, walk through the Emperor's gene vault and look upon the pods of the unborn Primarchs. And even there, the 11th's pod is described as innocent and pure, and one of them, Argel Tal, says that ending the 11th in infancy would unwrite a shameful future. But that is a vision, a demon's gift, unreliable by construction. It is a hint, not a record. And it is the author himself, Dembski-Bowden, who has said the lost Primarchs cannot ever be resolved because, in his words, that would be an answer, and there is not allowed to be an answer, which is the most important sentence in this entire investigation, and I am not going to pretend around it. The truth of the lost Primarchs is a deliberate void. The people who built this universe decided, on purpose, that the question would never be answered on the page. So when this channel says the answer is sitting in Cawl's vault, understand exactly what kind of claim that is. It is a conspiracy reading of an intentional silence, a way of looking at a hole the authors dug and saying, the hole has a shape, and the shape is a man. We are not claiming Games Workshop has secretly told us the answer through Cawl. We are claiming that within the fiction, if you take the rules of the fiction seriously,
there is exactly one being positioned to hold the answer, and the fiction has gone conspicuously quiet about him on exactly this point. That is the argument. No more than that, and no less.
Because here is what survives every caveat I have just made. Strip away the theories about what the templates show. Strip away the null reading, the danger reading, the ordered versus chosen debate. Set aside the vision in The First Heretic and the author's refusal to ever confirm it. What is left is a structure that does not depend on any of it. The official Imperial archive, the paper record, was erased. That is canon. The genetic archive, the Sang Primus Portum, the actual biological material of all 20 Primarchs, was not erased. That is canon too. And those two archives ended up in two different places. The names were struck out of the records. The genome was handed to one archmagos.
The Edict of Obliteration was the most thorough act of erasure in the Imperium's history, and it missed the one copy that physically cannot lie about what a Primarch was, because that copy was already in Cawl's keeping when the purge began. That is the whole case, and it is airtight in the only sense that matters. Not that we know what Cawl knows, but that we know he is the one being who could know it. Everyone else in the galaxy who might hold the truth holds it as memory. The surviving Primarchs, the Emperor on his throne. Memory can be erased, contained, allowed to lapse with death. Cawl holds it as material, as genome, as the one form of evidence that does not forget, kept by the one being who does not forget either. The surviving Primarchs know the story and could die with it. Cawl holds the source code and has already proven he cannot be made to lose information. Erase every record, and the truth is still sitting in a vault on a forge world, intact, waiting to be read by the man who has had 10,000 years to read it. And that is the irony I want to leave you on, before the closing. The entire community of theorists, every channel, every forum, every comment section that has spent years assembling fragments to guess at what the Second and the 11th were, has been doing detective work on a case where the evidence was never actually destroyed. We have been arguing over scattered hints in a dozen novels, over a demon's vision and a Primarch's offhand line, over which obscure chapter might secretly carry a lost gene line. And the complete, undegraded, verified source material has been sitting in one place the entire time. The mystery feels unsolved because the records were destroyed. But the records are not the genome. The genome survived. It survived in the keeping of a being who builds backups of himself so he can never lose anything, who absorbed hundreds of minds so nothing would be forgotten, who came back from 2 memory wipes with his hoard intact. If there is one place in this galaxy where the truth of the lost Primarchs was always safe, it is the last place anyone thinks to look. Not in a lost record, but in a living archive that calls itself Belisarius Cawl. Every theory about the lost Primarch starts from the same assumption, that the truth is gone, scrubbed, scattered, lost to the Edict of Obliteration 10,000 years ago. But the truth was never lost. You cannot build 20 Space Marine gene lines from 20 Primarch templates and somehow fail to notice that 2 of them were erased from history. Belisarius Cawl had the complete set. He has had it for 10,000 years, in a mind that forgets nothing and a vault that discards nothing.
While the rest of the galaxy argues over fragments, the one being who actually read the answer has spent 10 millennia saying absolutely nothing about it. The lost Primarchs aren't a mystery, they're a secret, and the man keeping it is still alive.